Hello, my name is Sam. I'm going to be the DM for the campaign that I've dubbed Halcyonic Folly. Now, this campaign has already had a couple of sessions, but we're not super far ahead. The players have only advanced one level since we started. It started at level 3, but we're now at level 4. Ahead of the first episode being recorded and posted, I wanted to make a little recap of the small amount that we have done, starting with a basic lore explanation of the world as it stands at the beginning of the campaign. For as far back as the world's history can remember, the world was ruled by numerous kingdoms, coexisting sometimes, at war other times, but the names of those kingdoms, they've been scrubbed, erased, destroyed. 12 years it has been since the Halcyon Protectorate came into control. Took over each and every kingdom from the inside. One changed law here, one race slightly discriminated against there. And then unprompted alliances, public executions, more and more and more, until what had once been a coalition of many kingdoms became one. Cultures were destroyed, people enslaved, and the rest subjugated to an existence of controlled peace, enforced by sword and indentured servitude in a sprawling megacity built from the remains of kingdoms that's name was outlawed by the Protectorate, and whose king had been publicly beheaded 12 years ago, as the last semblance of what once was destroyed by the Protectorate in a gruesome display of their victory. If you aren't important to the Protectorate, you work in their mines, in their shipyards, in their ever-growing construction projects. No one knows exactly what the Protectorate is building or why, but everyone knows that questioning will result in a swift and often lethal punishment. Rumor has it that there's somewhere the Protectorate hasn't reached. Rumors spoken in hushed whispers between shifts, with eyes darting in every direction for fear of the gleam of a sword being unsheathed from a scabbard or an arrow being notched from high up. No one truly believes these rumors. How could they, when the Protectorate's power seems so absolute? But it brings some dim hope to a people whose light has been snuffed by the eclipse of the Halcyon Protectorate. The campaign starts following 3 people. Rurik Frostbeard, a former soldier and cleric of the dwarven god Mercan. Sinclair Abdani, a former merchant whose life was destroyed by the Protectorate's rise, taking away his job and his trade. And Lisbeth Dragnair, a high elf whose family was once nobles, but with the Protectorate's rise and destruction of the major kingdoms of the world, her parents were killed, and she, at the young age of 4, was brought under the Protectorate's rule.
Rurik is a mountain dwarf. He was born and raised in the mines, but ever since a young age he always had this calling. And when he talked to his family about it, his family told him it was their god, Merkin. When Rurik turned 30, he went to find where his calling was. He stumbled upon a hill dwarven village, which is where his gut instinct was telling him where to go. And he noticed that goblins were raiding. After fighting off the goblins, he then made it his home, where he would help hunt. On one of his hunts, he shot a pregnant doe, not realizing what it was due to being a dwarf from the mines. An elvish woman rushed in. Her name was Evelyn. She was a druid. And together they saved the doe. And in return, Rurik found love. A few years passed and they got married, and they had a daughter. Her name was Rhea. Everything was going very well for this newfound family until the Protectorate arrived. They demanded that they surrendered, or that they would use force to overthrow their home. Rurik stood up for his newly found family, but in the end, his wife and his daughter were slain. Rurik began to hate his god, began to hate the Protectorate, and even more, began to hate himself. And after 6 years of studying and learning everything he possibly could to drown himself from the memories, he got that feeling he got all those years ago. And it showed him the path to the Protectorate mine, where for another 6 years he would be tortured and enslaved.
The name is Sinclair. Sinclair Apadonna. You may know me from a past life. You may have seen me inside my shop. It was a glorious shop. It was small and rather quaint, but I worked in that shop and I traveled about and I explored the many things that it meant to be a merchant, if you will. I had my shop was well known. It was very popular, but I one night I had an incident that soon changed my entire peripheral vision. My shop got raided, burned down, and absolutely ransacked and destroyed. All my goods gone. All my things I've worked hard for dispersed, poofed into the air. And I traveled for a good while trying to find the ones who did such a thing. Could never find them. But I do know one thing: I ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time because I was grabbed by a group of unrecognizable guards, thrown into a labor camp, and put to work in very dastardly conditions called the mines.
Elizabeth is quite young for an elf. Even by human standards, she is only a kid. When the Protectorate was taking over, she was only 4 when they attacked her family. Noble blood of truth. They had given Elizabeth to their loyal servant, a dwarf, to run away and hide. And as such, over the past 12 years of the Protectorate being in power, bringing Elizabeth up to the merely 16 of a child, she only knew artificial life. Luckily, the servant spent his time overworking himself to provide for her, so she did not have to suffer the fate of most to work, though she was not in any better position as the rest. One day he was killed for his worship of the old gods, leaving Elizabeth alone. Having found the truth about who she is and her mother's old signet ring, she was forced to go work into the mines. Her first shift ever, and it was quite the shift.
At the start, Rurik and Sinclair are leaving the mines that they were assigned to as Elizabeth was approaching, beginning her shift, having finally reached the age that the Protectorate deems worthy of work. However, as the group of them mill about the mine's entrance, the procession is led by a half-elf inquisitor by the name of Valerie, the captain of this area's guard garrison. As they were passing through, Rurik found interest in the group and attempted to speak to the Inquisitor, but as this happened, several of the people in the crowd around the mine turned on the guards' procession, killing a few of them, capturing the dwarf and capturing the half-elf. This attack was led by a high elf by the name of Circana. the leader of a coalition whose job was to hide people who wanted to escape the Protectorate, and their ultimate goal was the dissolution of the Protectorate as a whole and to restore the world to its former order. The group, Rurik, Sinclair, Lisbeth, and Valerie, were led into an expansive tunnel system that had been carved out underneath the city, where they were led to a war room. Circana explained to the group what their purpose was. That through the several years that the Protectorate has been in order, many of the people within it have grown into a state of unrest, having witnessed the Protectorate tear apart their lives as they knew them, and wished to perhaps bring their help in. Circana recognized them as sympathetic. Rurik, being a former soldier of Merkin, who had fought the Protectorate in its early days, Sinclair as sympathetic towards the rest of their plight, having also lost his livelihood, and Elizabeth as having lost her own family to the Protectorate, never having gotten to even know them to begin with. Valerie, however, wasn't given much choice. His options were to help or to remain in these tunnels, not allowed to leave. The group generally agreed. They spent some time in these tunnels, preparing and resting, collecting weapons, taking some time to train, and the like, and eventually Circana called the group together. Over the past several months, they had come to learn about a building on the east side of the city that had been abandoned, left entirely alone by the Protectorate's growth, despite the architecture around this building changing. The building, alone and empty, stood out like a sore thumb to the harsh architecture of the rest of the city. They believed that if this building had been left alone for so long, perhaps there was something about it that the Protectorate feared. And if the Protectorate feared it, it was something that perhaps the Coalition could use against it. So, Circana enlisted the group of them to investigate this old building. In the wee hours of the morning, 4 of them left the protection of the Coalition's tunnels and emerged onto the open, empty streets of a half-lit city. They crept through the alleys, eventually finding this building. Still old stone faces and wooden support beams compared to the hard stone faces of the buildings surrounding it. Eventually, the group of them found an entrance in the back, a half-boarded up window that they all entered through. Inside, Rurik found a circlet with some interesting markings and pocketed it, while the rest of the party explored through the rest of the building, finding it abandoned as though the residents had left in some sort of hurry. Overturned tables, plates still left with food on them, and even receipts of past orders. Rurik and Sinclair went into the cellar to explore what was down there and see if they found anything. Inside, Rurik discovered a dead body, wearing another one of these circlets with its back laid across a sigil of some sort carved into the cellar wall, and markings on the floor left very recently, as though somebody had heard the group of them entering and left in a hurry. Rurik returned to the rest of the party, informing them of this, and believed that there may still be someone inside of this very building, having left in a hurry and hid upstairs. Valerie elected to return to the Coalition to inform them of this, while the remaining 3 remained at the building to investigate and see if they could find these people and get answers. As Valerie left, Going back down the alleyways that he had come, Lisbeth, Rurik, and Sinclair went upstairs. Upstairs, they found another dead body laid out across the floor, and Rurik went into a sign built inside. Go back to Rurik went into. Rurik went into a half-finished room, as though it was still being furnished, and noticed that some of the boxes on the side seemed to be vibrating, and he could hear breathing behind it. As Lisbeth and Sinclair went into the master bedroom, where the extra body was laying across. Lisbeth noticed that from within a dresser next to the door, she heard breathing coming from inside. As Rurik backed out of the room that he was in an attempt to warn Lisbeth and Sinclair, Lisbeth opened the door to reveal a man wearing a rictus grin across his face, jumped out wielding a dagger, but not to attack Lisbeth or Sinclair, but to stab the body on the floor. At the same time, the man inside of the room that Rurik had been in jumped out and grabbed Rurik from behind, grappling him. In a moment of luck and speed, Sinclair grabbed the man who had attempted to stab the dead body, causing him to drop the blade. They believed, for a moment, that the crisis had been averted. However, as the blade fell to the ground, Lisbeth felt a pull from the blade. She felt it calling to her, wanting her to pick it up. In a moment of controlled weakness, Lisbeth picked up the dagger from the floor where it had landed and drove it into the dead body on the ground. As the blade pierced the body, purple smoke began to emerge from within, spreading out and filling the building around them as the two men that had been hiding wore horrifying grins, far lighter than a human body should allow. In the moment of the body's eruption into purple smoke, Lisbeth realized what had happened, and in a moment of fear and surprise, her body ignited, sorceress magic filling her body and causing her skin to erupt in flames as she backed up in fear. As the smoke spread, Sinclair felt it touch his arm and burn, causing him to drop the man that he caught. As he looked at his arm, the purple smoke seemed to seep into his skin, purple tendrils writhing under the skin of his arm and moving in unnatural patterns. Rurik, in a moment of pure anger at seeing Lisbeth, this girl who reminded himself so much of the daughter that he had lost several years before, twisted and smashed the head of the man who had grabbed him and stepped over to do the same to the body that Sinclair had dropped. With the two men dispatched, he moved to hug Lisbeth, despite the burning that touching her inflicted upon him. Slowly, he calmed her down, but at the same time, Sinclair noticed that the building around them seemed to be decaying at the touch of the purple smoke, the stone turning to dust and the wood rotting in front of his very eyes. At the same time, from outside of the building, Valerie noticed in a passing glance backwards that the outside of the building was doing much the same, shifting and decaying at an accelerated rate, as though the building was passing through time 100 years in a second. Valerie rushed back to the tunnels to collect Circana and lead an expedition to rescue the three. At the same time, Sinclair rushed Rurik and Lisbeth out of the building just as Lisbeth back up again, just as Valerie returned with more members of the coalition, Circana included. As the group of them returned to the tunnels, they noticed that the smoke was continuing to expand, stretching out past just the building and filling the streets. They realized in time that this smoke was going to continue expanding and that they were going to need to find somewhere else to hide out, because only within a matter of hours would that same smoke reach the tunnels in which they hid. The group spent some time ushering people out through another entrance and directing them towards a new hideout. However, as the last group was let out and the party realized that the smoke was only perhaps 30 or 40 feet away now, the group looked out as the last members of the coalition escaped from the tunnels and noticed a flock of birds. Strange and twisted by the smoke, barnacles and chitinous skin covering them in a way that shouldn't be possible on a bird. The swarm of birds descended on them, attacking them, but the group emerged victorious, decimating the flock and then running to hide at the new hideout. When they arrived, Circana was waiting for them and informed them that the Protectorate was hesitant to recognize the smoke as a threat. But as a few days passed and the group remained hidden in this hideout, the Protectorate finally admitted that it was an issue and began creating refugee camps for those who had resided in the area. However, the smoke had begun to slow its spread, allowing for them to take a breath and ease. At about the same time, Circana received word that at one of the entrances into the city, the guards were redirected, attempting to stem the flow of people trying to escape and even re-enter the area in which the smoke contaminated. They believed that a nearby grove of druids still remained hidden in the forests outside of the Protectorate's walls, if this forest still existed to begin with. The group was led, a few days later, to this gate, led by a half-elf woman named Irana. After some exploring and collecting a few new items, the group found a secret entrance, supposedly left there by the guards to allow them an easy exit outside of the walls to check on the progress of the construction outside of the walls, without having to open the main gates themselves. The group of them emerged outside of the walls and into full open sunlight. For some of them, for the first time they could remember, and for others, for the first time in many years. In the far distance, they could see a forest, the first sign of natural life in a long, long time. A group of them passed through half-completed construction that had been abandoned due to the smoke's expansion, and eventually, finally, reached the tree line, the first sign of something new to them in a long time. The group of them passed through the forest for several hours, eventually the trees falling dark as the sun finally set, the trees around them being lit by lightning bugs. However, as the group of them passed along, following the vague directions they had to this druid grove, they came across a clearing, dominated by the body of an eviscerated elk and several fungal colonies. As the group inspected this elk, they noticed something odd about the mushroom. The blood upon them seemed to have been put on it intentionally rather than splatter left behind from the dead elk. And as they inspected it, the red caps that were hiding beneath them emerged, attacking the group. After several minutes of the group attempting to kill these red caps, finally the last one was slain. But in the process, Valerie was struck down by one. As they rushed to check on Valerie, an arrow flew through the trees and killed the red cap that had felled Valerie, As they turned to discover where the arrow had come from, a centaur emerged from the tree. A woman who goes by the name of Branch Ferna. She drew her bow at the group, demanding to know who they were and what they were doing in the Ehrenthal woods. Rurik established to her that they were searching for a druid grove in these trees in a hope to enlist their help in something that had been happening. As they had this conversation, Valerie died, and Lisbeth, in a attempt to give him a proper funeral and death, set his body alight, and the group of them traveled into the woods after Branch Ferna to discover the Ehrenthal Grove. Eventually, they emerged from the trees and into a massive clearing dominated by a gargantuan tree, one that Rurik recognized. He recognized this place as where he had buried his wife and daughter. They had died in the war that drove him to where he is now. The tree that dominated this clearing had been but a sapling when he had buried his wife and daughter beneath them, but now it housed the grove in its entirety. Branch Ferna led them inside to introduce them to the Oak Mother, the leader of the grove, who recognized Rurik upon seeing him. She had been simply a druid initiate when Rurik had been there last, and she offered to help them on one condition. Over the past couple of years, something had been happening within these woods. A drain on the life force of the forest, one that drained on the druid's head just as much. This drain had killed the past Oak Mother, and now this one, an elf who seemed far older than she should, given her age, had taken her place. She begrudged not being able to go out and deal with it herself, but if there was not a druid of strong enough power within the circle in which she now resided, the forest could very well die as a whole. She beseeched them for their help in locating and cutting out whatever it was that was slowly killing the forest around them. Rurik vowed that in the name of his lost family, he would do whatever he could for the druids, and Lisbeth and Sinclair went alongside. And that, generally speaking, brings up to date on where we stand now. When the first episode is posted, I will be doing a much more succinct recap of last session beforehand, and the story of Halcyonic Folly will begin again. Thank you.